Good evening. My name is Harvey Glass, and I'm an alcoholic and an addict. Also from Los Angeles. I want to thank you guys for inviting me up here. I want to thank Corey for wearing that sport coat in my honor. It's, if I had to wear one, he's got to wear one. It's just it's the way it goes. I haven't been in Utah in a long time. It's changed a lot. I was telling Corey, sit at dinner, that the last time I was here, I'll share that a little bit with you because it just kind of typified what a fool I was. My girlfriend was producing a TV show at the Osmond Studios in Orem. Orem? Provo? Where is it? Orem. Orem. And I don't know, they all look alike to me. I don't know. And I flew up to spend the night with her and bring our favorite cocktail, which was basically just a simple little quart of Jack Daniels and a half ounce of cocaine. And and we spent the night, and I don't remember if we slept or not. And next morning I got up to get a cab to take me back to Salt Lake so I could get a plane to come back to my office. And the cab driver, nice, clean-cut young man driving 55 miles an hour. In those days, the speed limit was 55. And he says, "Go." And I said, "Can't you get this thing moving any faster?" And he said, "Oh, no, sir. 55 is the speed limit." And I said, "You're a Mormon, huh?" And he says, "Oh, yes, sir." And I said, "Well, that's too bad." And he said, "Why is that?" I said, "Because I'm going to do some lines of cocaine here, and if you'd move this thing a little faster, I'd give you some." And he said, "If you can hold the wheel, sir, I'll be happy to indulge." And that boy didn't go a mile under 75 for the rest of the time there, you know. I think he pulled that car up in front of the airline terminal, threw me out, and kept on going. He was so wired, it was unbelievable. But when I did cocaine, that's how you did it. I mean, I walked into business meetings and they'd have lines of cocaine out there before the meeting started. You know, it was kind of an acceptable thing. I did it in boardrooms and offices, everywhere. I'll tell you a little bit what I used to be like, what happened, what I'm like today. I don't talk about it. I talk about me, because it's my story, not it. Because it was strange, and I've never found out what it means anyway. That was. For the longest time, my whole philosophical search was to find out the meaning of the word "it" and what it is, you know, and people would say what it is, and I'd say, "What is it?" And people, they just looked at me like you're looking at me now, a little strange. I'm kind of like that still, you know. Anyway, I got drunk for the very first time on Jack Daniels 2 weeks after my 12th birthday. I love Jack Daniels. Absolutely love Jack Daniels. I'm not a chapter 3 type of alcoholic or addict. When I find something I stick with, a certain combination, I stick with it. And Jack and I were together for 27 years. I love it. I still love the smell of Jack Daniels. Actually, when I had about 9 months of sobriety, I told my first sponsor what my plan was, and I was exploring the possibility of starting a men's aftershave lotion in the aroma of Jack, you know, and he informed me that not everybody felt that closeness to Jack that I did, you know. Don't know why. I started smoking dope when I was about 15, and I basically went through college drinking and smoking dope and taking an occasional upper when I needed to be up all night for something important, which never had anything to do with school, you know. And you know, as I stayed sober longer, I flashed on other things that have happened to me. You know, I remember I went to University of Southern California, and I remember in my junior year participating in some LSD experiments that every major university was doing in those days. You know, they paid us $25 and put us down for 8 hours. Boy, it was strange, you know. And every once in a while, I had a fraternity brother who was half Jewish and half Agua Caliente Indian. It's the tribe that owns Palm Springs. Very wealthy guy, you know. And his grandfather was the medicine man of the tribe, and he had the formula for the peace pipe. And so every once in a while we'd go out into the desert, go smoke the peace pipe and go flying saucer watching, and I understand now why the Indians always made peace, because they were too loaded to do anything but say hey. But anyway, in August of 1965, I was out of town with some people and got rip-roaring drunk. And we had a half bottle of Jack Daniels left, and this guy I was with said, let's finish this. And I said, I can't finish anymore. And I can't drink another drop. And he said, I've got something that'll clear your head. And he laid out my first 2 lines of cocaine. And it cleared my head. And that sent me off. I used cocaine on a daily basis from August of 1965 until September the 16th, 1983. That was it. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. It did for me what nothing else has done for me. I've always had this basic fear, this paralyzing fear, that every morning, that as soon as I would wake up, I had this fear, that the biggest fear was to get out of bed in the morning, because I knew that all hell was going to break loose as soon as I got out of bed. And it was almost paralyzing for me. And what Coke did for me was it got me out of bed. Actually, it sprung me out of bed, but it was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. And what I used to do for many years, most of my Coke use was in the morning. I'd wake up and I'd do 2 toots to get me out of bed, and then I do 2 toots to get me into the bathroom, and I do 2 toots to get me into the shower, and I do 2 toots to dry me off, and I do 2 toots to comb my hair, another 2 toots to comb my beard, 2 toots to get me dressed, 2 toots to put on my shoes, 2 toots to put on my jacket, 2 toots to go downstairs, 2 toots to drink a cup of coffee. And with my cup of coffee, I found this other gift from God. It was called Val Release. This was a little pill that kept 5 milligrams of Valium in your body on a 24-hour time release basis. This was a sweet little drug. It's off the market, guys. Sorry. Anybody wants to go out and try it, it's gone. And I would take 8 or 9 of those with my morning cup of coffee. Then I would take 4 Fiorinol with codeine number 4s for the headache I knew was coming on. And I'd drive to work. Now, sometimes I'd drive quick, sometimes slow, depending on what was kicking in, I never knew. I never knew if I was, in a hurry to get to work or just wanted to relax, and kind of cruise in. I worked on the Sunset Strip. I was a business manager in the entertainment industry in those days, and I had a great time. It was rocking. The Strip was rocking in those days, It was fun. And I'd stay in my office every day until 11:30, and then I'd walk the 180 steps from the front door of my office to my favorite little watering hole, this restaurant and bar called the Cock and Bull up on Sunset Boulevard. And somebody knows the Cock and Bull here? Who knows the Cock and Bull? Oh my God. Jesus, all right. Poor people. It was a great place. Just a bar full of drunks. A woman was relatively safe walking in that bar. She'd get hit on, but most of the guys were too drunk to do anything, And I needed a drink. And the reason that I needed to drink was that what happens to me is that when I am in fear, it always manifests itself into rage. Really into that deep homicidal rage. I've been full of that rage all of my life until I hit about 10 years of sobriety, when that rage finally started to ebb. And I mean, it was just there, always right beneath the surface. And what the booze did was it brought that rage down. And the Coke took away the fear, the booze brought the rage down. And I'd sit in there and I'd drink for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and I'd go back to work, and I'd get back up there again in the middle of the afternoon and drink for a while, and then I'd go back to work, and I'd get back up there again around, in the evening and start drinking again. And then partying, and then we'd go out someplace and doing crazy things, And I could never predict my behavior. The drinking and drug use that I did during the day allowed me to function, allowed me to build a business and become however successful I became. I don't know. When I first got sober, I used to say that I was an extremely successful business manager. As I've stayed sober longer, realism has sunk in, and I really don't know how successful I was. I did well for a few years, and I was probably an up-and-comer. I don't know, who knows? Got my name in the paper. I'll tell you about that later. But anyway, I did that for 12 and a half years. That was my daily routine. And then after 12 and a half years, I started to abuse alcohol and drugs. It's the way it was, I just went nuts. I could hold it together for 12 and a half years. And then all of a sudden, for the next 5.5 years, I went absolutely nuts. Absolutely nuts. Now, my wife likes to tell the story when she speaks that she says that she went nuts when we got together. And I took offense at that the first time I heard her say that. And then I realized she was right. Because for the first time in both of our lives, we were with somebody that put absolutely no limits on our drinking and drug use. This woman drank and did drugs just like I did. I should take my watch off so I don't speak more than the 2.5 hours Corey told me I could. Is that right? Anyway, but she's right, because we'd stay up all night long. It didn't make any difference. But what happened was that when I started to abuse it, I stopped functioning. The fear came back. Nothing would take away that fear. Nothing would take away that rage. I spent 6 months, one period, never leaving my house. I'd go out about 3 o'clock in the morning. It's the only time I could do that. And it was strange. It was really strange. And I started to lose my business. I started to lose my clients because I wasn't servicing them any longer. And what happened was that I was losing my business, I was losing my clients, I wasn't losing my expenses, so I stole some money from some of my remaining clients. Considerable sum of money. Boom, just like that. Just like that. I became a thief. I used to say, these are some of the realizations that happen as you stay sober longer. I used to say that all my life I'd prided myself on my honesty and my integrity, but the truth of the matter was that I've never had any honesty and integrity. I cheated on my first wife a week after we were married. I was a scumbag from the get-go. Didn't make any difference. I was just never a thief because I'd never needed any money. As soon as I needed money, I stole it. Boom. Just like that. I didn't do it very wisely. I got caught. It still took a couple of years to catch me, but I got caught. And it hit the front page of the LA Times because it was a Hollywood case. There were some actors involved. And it hit the front page of the LA Times on the morning of my daughter's bat mitzvah. I don't know if you know what that is. It's like a Jewish confirmation. And I had to go to this party with 400 of my ex-wife's nearest and dearest friends there and try to function. And that day was my bottom. That was honestly my bottom. I had seen something that day that I can close my eyes and still see, and I had never seen before. I'd always felt like a piece of dirt, so I never really had any self-esteem. So the only thing that made me feel better were my belongings. The houses, the cars, the jewelry, whatever. And I'd lost all that. But I saw in people's eyes disgust and revulsion, and I had never seen that before. And they looked at me with disgust and revulsion. It was a hard day to get through, a very hard day to get through. That was my bottom. I didn't get sober. And I didn't get sober because I have never had a problem with alcohol and drugs. My problem have always been people. If they just left me the hell alone, I'd be fine. That's what I've always believed. Just leave me alone, I'll be fine, It was almost a year to the day later. I was in temple on Yom Kippur, which is the holiest day in the Jewish religion. It is the day, surprisingly enough, that we are there asking God to atone for our sins. And God knew I needed to be there for about 3 months, but it's a one-day gig, and that's all he got. And we sang this prayer that I got very emotional over called the Aleinu, the Adoration. And I started to cry, and I turned to my girlfriend and my 2 kids, and I said, "Excuse me, I have to go to the bathroom." And I walked into the bathroom, and I pulled out this little emergency stash of cocaine I used to carry with me for the many emergencies that occur during a day. You guys know about those. And I was about to do a couple of toots, and I said, "Why am I doing this?" And I threw it out. I had just thrown it out. I had never done that before. Never in my life had I done that. I have never felt any remorse about my drug use or my drinking. As I say, I'm not a Chapter 3 type of alcoholic. I didn't know. I never felt any guilt. To me, drugs and alcohol were never the problem. It was always the solution. It was the only thing that allowed me to live and to function. And I threw it out. And I still, to this day, I don't know why. I like to think that the long arm of God came out of the sky and knocked that stuff out of my hands, because that's my only explanation. I have no other idea why. And I went and I sat down, and I didn't say anything to anybody. That was September 17th, 1983. I've been sober from that day to this day. It's incredible to me. 16 years without a drink, without any drugs, nothing. How silly. Anyway, I went and I sat down. I didn't say anything to anybody for about 3 days, and then I started to feel crazy. I felt like I was coming out of my skin. And I called this guy that I knew, that I'd sent some clients to, who was in charge of the motion picture health. His name was Tom Kay, and I asked him what he thought I should do. And he said he had started a meeting called the Whatever Group. And this was a group that he had started for an organization, an offshoot of Alcoholics Anonymous called Alcoholics Anonymous for Cocaine Addicts, that evolved into Cocaine Anonymous. And he suggested I go to that meeting. And I walked into that meeting that night, actually. I'd called him, and I walked into that meeting that night, and it was the most incredible sight I'd ever seen in my life. Just unnerved me. It was so incredible. I walked up these rickety steps of this old IATSE Union Hall on Sunset Boulevard, and in front of me were about 300 people, crazy, just crazy, screaming, raging, chairs were flying, knives were coming out, cops were called every week, dragging somebody out of there. I mean, it was nuts. This was before all the hospital programs and drug recovery houses were around. And it was nuts. It was just nuts. You look around, everybody was kicking everything. They're bouncing off the walls, and you'd look around the room, and the only way you knew anybody was staying sober was you'd look around to see who was getting fat. If they were getting fat, they were probably staying sober, I put on 80 pounds when I got sober. 22 of it I needed. The rest of it, I was out like this. I would have had to stand this far from the podium. It was just huge, and I had these 3 pair of black nylon warm-up pants. That was the only thing I wore in this old beat-up corduroy jacket. The pants kept on stretching, It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. I want to tell you what a changed person I was that very first night. Prior to getting sober, I used to carry an Ingram 9mm machine pistol with a 47-shot clip and a silencer in the car with me at all times because they were out there and I had to be prepared, and I know some of you know who they were, I want to tell you that I'd only pulled that gun out once, just so that you can be assured. Somebody cut me off at the gas station, took my pump, and we all know that's a capital offense. And I reached under the seat and I pulled out baby is what I called it. I pulled out baby, and I slapped that clip in and I jacked it up and I pointed it at him. And he did the only thing he could have done was he got the hell out of there. Because I don't know what I would have done. I'd been up at that point for about 3 weeks driving around and I needed gas. And I couldn't wait. I just couldn't wait. Well, I no longer carried that gun. I carried a little Beretta. 8 in the clip, 1 in the chamber, jacked, hammer back, safety on, the military lock, right here in a little waist holster. First 4.5 months of my sobriety, I carried that gun. I want to assure you I never once pulled it out at a meeting. Not once. Not once. I reached for it a lot. If you got too close, I'd pull my jacket back and show you, let you see it. But I never pulled it out. That first night there, a couple of things happened to me. I stole my first big book that night. The secretary made the announcement that, nobody should leave without the big book, and if you can't afford it, we'll make liberal credit terms. Well, I couldn't afford it, but I was too proud to tell you, so I stole it, Following week, I took the 12 and 12. The third week, somebody mentioned God, so I grabbed the 24-hour day book. I took them all. I just took them all. When I had about a year of sobriety, that same secretary asked me to lead the meeting. And I said to him, I think I owe this group an amends. He said, no kidding. Like I thought I was so slick that nobody knew I was stealing the books, I met a guy my very first night at my very first meeting. Actually, it was a guy that I'd known off and on for about 15 years. His name was Jim Loeb, and I talk about Jim all the time because Jim is the reason that I went to my second meeting. Jim was a personal manager in the music business, and we'd known each other. We were both in the music business. We'd known each other a lot, as I said, and a lot of similarities in our background. And he pulled out this little mimeograph sheet of CA meetings. There were, I think, 5, 6, 7 meetings in those days. And he circled this meeting for Wednesday night Cedars for the next night. And he said, Harvey, if you meet me at this meeting tomorrow night, we'll go out for dinner after the meeting. And it had been a long time since anybody invited me out to dinner, and that was the reason that I went to my second meeting. It's the only reason I went to my second meeting. I don't know if I'd ever gone back to another meeting. I believe the meeting directories are the single most important piece of literature we have in this program. If you don't know where the meetings are, you don't know where the miracles happen. You know, it's as simple as that. You know, Jim was a great guy. When I had 8 months of sobriety, Jim, who could never put more than 30 days together, killed himself. And I don't know why 16 years later I'm sober and Jim's dead. I refuse to believe in the kind of God that would you know, kill him and keep me sober. It only loves me because I'm sober. I won't believe in that kind of a vindictive, punishing God. I have to believe that God loves us all enough to show us his program, and then it's up to us to work our asses off to stay sober, because it's difficult. It's hard when you think about it. You know, hell, it's un-American when you really think about it. You know, this is against the American way of life. So I don't, you know, I just don't understand that. I got a sponsor when I had about 2.5 months of sobriety. Great guy, wonderful guy. Also a guy that I'd known off and on for years. Actually, we went to high school together, and he was sober about 4 years at that time. He got me into service right away. We started doing 12-step work. You know, it was really cool. Took me on my first 12-step call with him, and I thought, you know, he's taking the right guy. I can really help. We go to this guy's apartment, and he sends me into the kitchen to wash the dishes. I wasn't washing the dishes at home, and he was sending me into the kitchen to wash his fool's dishes, you know. Guy didn't stay sober. I got upset because the guy didn't stay sober, and we left, and we did, you know, and that's what counted. That's the only thing that counted, actually, as it turns out. I did my first inventory with him, 35 pages of people that had wronged me, you know. And he gave me a hug, and he, you know, patted me on the back and said, "Keep coming back, Harv, we'll do this again." I had no idea what he was talking about, you know. I said to him one time, I said, "How long do I got to go to these damn meetings for?" And he didn't give me that pat answer, "Until you want to." Because I wouldn't have accepted that. He said, 1.5 years. I said, 1.5 years? He said, 1.5 years. I said, I can hang with that. Now, it never dawned on me to ask him why, after 4 years of sobriety, he was still going to meetings, you know. But I'm not looking out. I'm only looking at me, so I had no clue about that. I said to him one time, I said, you know, I don't have any friends in this program. He said, the next time somebody asks you how you're doing, tell them the truth. Just tell them the truth. So that night at a meeting, this guy, Richard F., comes up to me, and he says, "Hey, Harv, how you doing?" I said, "I'm doing terrible. I've had the worst day of my life." He said, "Let me tell you about my day." And he started to talk. And I'm thinking, this dirty, rotten guy. I just told him I've had the worst day of my life. He didn't even hear me. He just started to talk. And then I got it. I wasn't listening to him. I was in my own mind. So I started to talk. So the two of us, so he's talking and I'm talking. Two of us are talking at each other. Neither of us are listening to each other. We did this for about 10 minutes. Pats me on the shoulder and he says, "Great talking to you, Harv, and we've been friends ever since." You know? I mean, we're still friends. I mean, we go to 2 meetings together a week. You know, I mean, it's amazing. It's what happens. This guy taught me many things. I live in Sherman Oaks, which is in the San Fernando Valley. Our Tuesday night meeting was in Hollywood. One night we had a Southern California rainstorm. You know what those are, about 1/16 of an inch, you know? And I wasn't driving over the hill to Hollywood. And the meeting was from 8:30 to 10. At about 11 o'clock, I'm sitting at home. I hear this banging on my door. And I open up the door, and there's Bill holding it on his bicycle, just drenched. His hair's all wet and everything, and on his bicycle. He had ridden his bicycle from Hollywood over the hills about 9 miles to my house. And he said, "Where were you tonight?" I said, "I was here." He said, "Why weren't you at the meeting?" I said, "It was raining." said, "You never got loaded when it rained?" I said, "What's that got to do with anything?" And he turned around, got on his bike, and rode off. And I stormed around that house till about 2 in the morning, just screaming at him. You know, what is this guy? What is he doing? What does he know? Boom, boom, boom. And then I got it. You know, then I got it. The next night it was still raining. I called him up and I said, "Hey, I'm going to the meeting. You want me to give you a lift?" And I picked him up. Now when it rains, I go to a meeting, even if it's not my regular meeting night. You know, I just go to a meeting. My wife says, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to a meeting." She said, "Why? It's not a..." I said, "I'm going to a meeting. It's raining. You know, I'm going to a meeting." It's what I do. We had a lot of rain this last year in L.A. from El Nino. I was at a lot of meetings, you know. It was crazy. You know, people were saying, "Harv, what are you doing at this meeting?" I said, "I'm at a meeting. I love meetings. It's raining." You know. It's nuts. It was just nuts. When I had 17 months of sobriety, I finally had to go to court to face this hearing about me. It had nothing to do with my guilt. There was no question as to my guilt. They just didn't know what to do with me. You know, the probation department wrote a report. We had a private probation guy write a report. The prosecuting attorney had an idea what he wanted. My defense lawyer had an idea what he wanted. Didn't make any difference. The judge knew what he wanted. He banged that gavel down and sentenced me to 5 years in state penitentiary. And that was it. They lifted me up and carried me out of there. I'd had my leg operated on about 4 months before, 5 months before, and I was still on crutches. And my good leg couldn't move, and my bad leg couldn't move. My good leg wasn't, you know. And this marshal just came up right behind me, picked me up, and carried me out of there. Carried me right into this little holding cell behind court, put me there. Said, "Welcome to reality." Closed the door. Boom. There I was, sitting there, just scared to death. I'd never been arrested before. It was amazing. It was an incredible experience. I started to cry. I got very scared. Then I said the Serenity Prayer, and that didn't help. And I said some prayers in Hebrew, and that didn't help. I sang the prayer that I sang right before I got sober, that I still do on a daily basis. That didn't help. All these guys that are in the holding cells with me, there were about 8 or 9 guys in this holding cell with me, looking at me like I'm nuts, you know. And finally I got pissed. I got angry. That rage came out. And I said to myself, if I ever hear somebody at a meeting say that their worst day of sobriety was better than their best day of using, I'm going to rip out their larynx, you know. And I did that, and then I surrendered, and I realized what the second half of the first step was finally all about. You know, I'd never realized that before. It was an easy admission for me to make, to say that I was an alcoholic and a drug addict, that I'm powerless over alcohol and drugs. That was easy. But I could never admit that my life was unmanageable. You know, I'd give it lip service and I'd talk about it, but I always knew that I could control. And what's happened to me in the 16 years that I've been sober is that I realized in order for me to be a productive member of society, it's just a matter of small surrenders on a daily basis. You know? And I get help. I get help from it. I'm a better driver today. There was a time when I had to be first, and I thought I had to be first. Today I let people in. I let them cut me off. I just wave them in. You know? Doesn't make any difference. Now, I'll tell you the help that I got about that. I read an article in the LA Times about 4 or 5 years ago that said between 30 and 35% of the drivers in Southern California are armed. And I'm not. So I let them in because you know, 1 out of 3 is armed, and I'm not. That makes it 1 out of 2. So I just let them pass me by. I don't care about that. It was an incredible experience. They brought me back from the joint 3 months later, back into that guy's courtroom, and for what's called a sentence modification, and they knocked a year off my sentence. So I had a net of 4. In California in those days, you did roughly half time. I did 22 and a half months in state penitentiary and 5.5 months in a work furlough house. It's the reason I'm alive and sober today. There is no doubt in my mind, absolutely no doubt in my mind. I needed a place to go to make the amends that I would never be able to make. I needed a place to go to knock out my omnipotence and most of my arrogance. I needed a place to go that people could prove to me and show me that I was capable and worthy of being loved. I used to get 20 to 25 letters a week from people in this program. Every week I had people coming down to visit me. Every couple of weeks I have 2 friends, Neil B. and Richard Levy and Neil Berlinski, used to pack their car full of newcomers and say, you guys think you got it bad? Let's go visit Harv. And they bring these poor fools down to the visiting yard, you know. Say, hey, Harv, tell them what it's like, and I would, you know. Now, I believe all that could have been accomplished in about a month, but I wasn't in control. I want to tell you how lame I was. I'd never been arrested before. I'm a Jewish accountant. I have no idea what's going on. I'm sitting in L.A. County Jail for a couple of weeks before I caught the chain to the joint. Doesn't that sound cool? Hey, man, we're catching the chain to the joint. I'm sitting there for a while, and everybody kept on mispronouncing my name. It took me 3 days to catch this. My name is Harvey. They kept on referring to me as Homie, you know? And I kept on telling them, hey, man, my name's not Homie, it's Harvey, you know? Finally, after 3 days, I got it, you know? And I said, all right, hey, Homie. We caught the chain of the joint, which is what they do is they handcuff a bunch of fools to a long chain, toss their butts on a bus, and drive them the hour to Chino. Something I want to do on a daily basis, you know? But they didn't do that with me because they didn't want to put this fat old Jew on crutches back there with everybody else because they figured they'd take away my crutches and beat the you-know-what out of me with them. So they put me in this little room on the bus, which I thought was very sweet of them, and it turns out that that was the high-powered room. So for about 3 weeks, everybody thought I was some sort of Jewish serial killer, so they left me alone, you know. It was crazy. My very first night I was there, they put me in this area called Central, which actually looks like Sing Sing in the movies, you know. One-man cells all the way down, which a month later I'd have given my eye teeth for a one-man cell, but one-man cells all the way down. 6 tiers up, you know, just rows and rows of cells. And I'm lying there. Some corrections officer, God, I hate to refer to them nicely, but some corrections officer had took pity on me and given me some smoking tobacco, some of the most rotten stuff I'd ever smoked in my life. And I didn't have any cigarette papers, so all I had was a legal tablet. So I'd rolled myself a cigarette about that long, you know. And I'm lying in this bunk smoking this thing, you know, and I hear this guy in the next cell yell out, "Victoria! Victoria!" And I'm thinking, what's going on here? This is a men's prison, you know? And then I hear from 4 or 5 tiers up, I hear, "Yeah, baby." And then he said something which I can't say because my wife tells me I can't say it anymore. It'll be the title of my book if I ever write it. But he said this, and I started to laugh. I just started to laugh. And then the next morning I met Victoria, and she was very cute. Prison's a very strange place, I've got to tell you. It's, she came over to the main yard for a while. She wanted to move in with me and wash my socks. I wouldn't let her. I was there for a few days, and they moved me to this transit yard called the West Yard. And basically what it is they put 2,500 violent sociopaths into a small area and see how they get along. Decide where to send them. So in the middle of these 2,500 violent sociopaths, they put this fat old Jew on crutches, you know, and boom, and say, "Get along, guy." And I did. I mean, it was strange, but I did. And I was in there the first few minutes I was there. I was in the reception center, and I'm sitting there, and this guy walks up to me and he says, "Your name Harvey Glass?" And I don't like that, you know. I didn't like being recognized in those days. And I said, "Yeah, why?" He said, "Well, I've been waiting for you. A buddy of mine wrote me from L.A. I'm the secretary of the AA meeting here, and if you need a book or anything like that, I have it all here. We have a meeting on Sunday nights. They just had one meeting on that yard. So we have a meeting on Sunday nights, and come on to the meeting." And he got me a book, and it was great. It was wonderful. I'll tell you a couple of things that happened to me. I was lying on my bunk. I'd been down about 3 weeks, and I'm lying on my bunk, and I felt the bunk shake, and I looked up, and I knew that life as I had lived it was gone forever. Standing over me was this huge guy, shirt off, huge guy, buffed up. Everybody in the joint worked out with weights. Not me, but everybody else did, you know, and just buffed up. He's got swastikas all over his body, lightning bolts all over his body. He's got Oildale, which is this little city outside of Bakersfield. It's the only city in California that has its own Ku Klux Klan clubhouse. He's got Oildale tattooed over his belly button. He's got SWP for Supreme White Power tattooed under his belly button, you know. And he looks down at me, and I look up at him, and I detect what I think is a little glint of love in his eye, you know. And he said to me, he said, "Is your name Harvela?" Now, Harvela is what my mother calls me. If you've ever heard the definition of a Jewish mother, multiply it 1,000-fold, and there's my mom, you know. She's been yanking my chain for all my life and still does. I mean, she drives me crazy. And I looked at this guy and I said, "My name's Harvey. Where did you get this Harvela?" And he said, "Well, your mother told my mother I'm supposed to talk to you." Now, what had happened was my mother ran into this guy's mother and grandmother out on the visiting yard, and as is her wont, she talks to everybody, you know. She said, "What's your son in for?" And they said, "Drugs and alcohol." And she said, "Wasn't that a coincidence? So is my Harvela." Now, there's 6,000 guys in the joint. My mom thinks we're the only two of the problem, you know, but she doesn't know. She said, "But you ought to have your son talk to my Harvela because he's been clean and sober for a year and a half, and maybe he can help you out." And that's what he was coming to talk to me about sobriety and staying sober. We were very much alike. I was 40 years old, upper middle class, Jewish accountant, highly educated. He was a 34-year-old street junkie, been coming to joint since he was 14, head of the Aryan Brotherhood in the southern prisons. Not prison, but prisons. More raw power in this guy's hands than I'd ever seen. There were 4 guys on the yard that had that power. There were the 2 Mexican gangs. There was the Black Guerrilla Family guy, the leader of that, and the leader of the Aryan Brotherhood. These guys were 4 bad dudes, you know. And it was amazing. I got even with him, though. I brought him into the Jewish temple, put a little yarmulke on him, you know. I said, "Hey, man, you want to stay sober? It's what you got to do, you know." Come at me with that Aryan Brotherhood stuff, right? But I want to tell you something. Sobered up, he wasn't any different than we are. Wasn't any different than we are. I'd like to tell you he stayed sober, but he didn't. 3 years after I got out, if you can believe this, I actually went back for a banquet. My best friend in the joint, Big Jim, who's now sober 10 years, but Big Jim had to go back in 3 more times to prove to himself that he was in fact an alcoholic and a drug addict, you know, and an armed robber for that matter. And this was one of the times Jim was back, and so my friend Big Bad Bob, everybody had to have a name, Big Bad Bob, and I went in to see Homie. So Homeboy and I went in to see Homie. I knew how to say that now, you know. And we went in. They let us literally walk on the yard. Just opened up the gate and let me back in, you know. Didn't even frisk me going in. And so we walked on the yard, and right out where this banquet was going to be, there were like 40 guys I'd been down with that were all back. You know, they all came back home because that's what they do. And they're all back, and they're waiting to say hey to me. Nobody says hi. It's hey, hey. They used to call me Had Money, you know. So it was, "Hey, Had Money, stay down with your bad self." I never found out what "stay down with your bad self" meant, you know. I knew how to say it. I just never understood anything. It took me a year and a half to find out what this meant, you know. You guys know what this means? In the old days of the stick shifts on the column, see, it used to be on the column, not on the floor. You would drop it into first and haul ass. Well, that's what it is. Boom. You jump in here and haul ass. So you move. So if you're someplace and you shouldn't be there and somebody does this, you leave. Took me a year and a half to figure that one out. I never did figure out "stay down with your bad self." But anyway, some of the guys had told me that Randy had just gotten out one more time. And this time he was going to do it with the church. Now, I'll tell you what did happen. About 3 years ago, this guy, I was speaking at a meeting, and this guy said, "Do you want me to find him for you?" And he was a private detective. And I said, "Sure, if you can." And he found him, and I talked to Randy on the phone. And Randy said he was going to NA meetings, but he'd just been suspended from work for a couple of weeks because he'd given him a dirty test. But they told him up in Bakersfield that if they caught him on a beef, they were going to 3-strike his butt. And we made plans to have lunch in 2 weeks. And he didn't show up. And I called the number that I had from him. It was disconnected. So I called his parole officer that I knew, because I'd gotten the parole agent's name, and I called his parole agent. His parole agent said he got popped on a new beef and they were 3-striking him. He was going in 25 to life. He was 48 years old at that point, which means theoretically he's going to get out when he's 73, and he will not live that long. The only way you live to be 73 in the penitentiary is if you go in at about 72 and a half, because it's, you know, it's not an easy life. I mean, it is, and it isn't. You know, there's no responsibility, but it's a hard life. It's a hard way to go. It's really a hard way to go. I met a guy in there, this old black guy. You know, I got to stop saying that, because that now, as it turns out, well, he was black, but as it turns out that he's not old, because I am now the same age he was when I met him. So I got to stop saying old. Anyway, this guy's name was Bill Haywood. His story's in the NA Big Book. He was probably one of the greatest men that I've ever met in my life. Bill had done 25 years behind bars and then gotten out and got sober in the joint, got out, got off parole, didn't know how to do anything but be a cook in a penitentiary, because that's what they always made him. So when he got off parole, he went back to the joint and applied for a job as a cook. And they had to hire him because he was the single most qualified man that ever applied for the job. He had 25 years experience, you know. And they hired him, and he became the liaison between the AA and NA panels and the joint. And he used to come in with the panels. And for some reason or other, I connected with this guy, and I truly connected on an emotional level. We had nothing in common other than the fact that we were both ex-cons and ex-vets, you know. And that was it, but we had nothing in common. Educational-wise, nothing, absolutely nothing. Experiences. And I connected with this guy, and I wrote an inventory. And I read this inventory to him, and I gave up every single secret that had been buried deep inside of me all my life. Things that I had never been able to tell a soul, you know, and a lot of things I hadn't even hardly been able to admit to myself. And I read it to him. I trusted him. He was the first human being that I ever trusted. And what happened to me, this is my experience, I don't know how it works for other people, but what happened to me was that when I was able to trust a human being, I was able to trust a being that wasn't human. And I was able to finally have some trust in God. I'd always believed in God, I just never had any trust in God. And I was able to believe in God and to trust him at the same time. Today I go through my life knowing that I am in complete control of the direction of my life and no control of the results of my life. When I walk out my front door, I choose to go either to the left or to the right. Once I go to the left, I have no control over what's going to happen, and I could care less what happens to the right, because it's out of my jurisdiction. You know? Ooh, a phone. Cool. I love cellular phones going off in meetings. Aren't they great? It's the time of the 90s. And it was because of Bill that I was able to do that. You know? He died a few years ago. He moved to Phoenix. And he lived in Phoenix. He died about, I think it was about 4 years ago now, 3-4 years ago, and he had lived in Phoenix for 8 years. And I used to go see him once or twice a year, and we talked on the phone once a month. He was no longer my sponsor, but we talked for what we always talked. And he was a great guy, just an incredible guy. And he said to me, and when he died, I was bummed. I was just bummed, just crazed. Until for about 3 weeks, they did a memorial for him in L.A. And I went to this memorial, and there were 400 people there. This memorial. He hadn't lived in L.A. in 8 years. 400 people at this memorial. And one after another, people got up and talked about how this guy saved their lives, how he made a difference in their life, and how they were sober today because of him. And I got it. It had nothing to do with my grief. It was rejoicing in his life, you know? And that's what it was. Nobody dies if they're still alive in your heart. This is the way that I believe. And this man is still alive in my heart. I got out of that penitentiary and I went to a work furlough program. I was scared to death. Scared to death. I had no idea what was going to happen to me. I didn't know how my relationship was going to work, what kind of work I could do, how I'd be able to function, you know, how people were going to accept me. I had no idea. I was scared to death and full of that rage. That rage came back, and I was just raging for 5 years, just crazed. And people used to allow me to call them up and scream at them, just scream at them. This one guy in particular was the angriest man in the program in L.A. And I would call him up and scream at him. just scream for 5 minutes, and I'd finish, and he'd say, Harvey, I love you. Can you get through another hour, and then you can call me? And I could usually get through 2 hours or 3 hours, then I'd call him again. I can't believe that people put themselves out for me like that. It was an incredible act of kindness and consideration and service. It was amazing.